All right, so here we are. Hello, Carla. It's Carla's and my first live Facebook event.
Oh, yes.
I'm Blyth Lord, the founder and executive director of Courageous Parents Network, and this is Carla Steckman,
Mother of Talia.
mother of Talia, a mother of Cameron. We both have two other healthy children. And this is the second in 2 weeks live events on anticipatory grief. Last week we had Carrie Paget, a bereaved mom, and Nancy Frumer-Steyer, a psychologist who's worked closely with Courageous Parents Network, in conversation about anticipatory grief and what it is. And Carrie shared sort of how her experience with it. And now we're going to continue that conversation with two other moms, but particular Carla, our guest. Carla and our connection goes a little deeper than typical, which is that both of our daughters had infantile Tay-Sachs. They were 17 years apart, I think. I met Carla last April at the annual family conference for families with children affected by, it's the National Tay-Sachs and Allied Disease, NTSAD has an annual family conference for the families in their group, namely Tay-Sachs, Canavan disease, Sandhoff, and GM1. And I got to meet Carla and beautiful Talia, who reminded me a lot of my own daughter, Cameron. And we bonded there. And that's continued ever since. And Carla was really nice to come from Albany, where she lives, to join us here tonight. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
So if you could just quickly tell us a little bit about your family and where Talia was in the birth, and how old she was when she was diagnosed, and how recently she died, just to give our audience.
Yeah. Talia is my third child. We had Nathan and Audrey, who are right now 7 and 5, and Talia would be a little over 2 right now. And she was diagnosed at 11 months old. So Nathan and Audrey were 5 and 3, or almost 3, when she was diagnosed. It was a big surprise. It was very challenging, of course. And Tay-Sachs was not a disease that was new to us. I knew that my father was a carrier, and I had gotten tested, and it was a mistaken false negative, a lab error. So that was an incredible surprise to us. But I believe that in the end, it also was helpful for us to not be diagnosed with a mysterious disease, but one that I understood to be incredibly serious right off the bat. And I think that was helpful in our ability to create a care plan and make sure that her life was as comfortable as it could be.
Do you remember feeling, Carla, how, the sort of the topic, the headline for all of this is anticipatory grief. Mm-hmm. Do you remember, did you recognize that what you were feeling upon diagnosis was grief, and how would you describe that?
I knew that upon diagnosis, that Tay-Sachs at this point in medical science was not a disease that is able to be cured or is able to be effectively treated. So I think my husband is a doctor, and that also helped us to understand the severity of it off the bat, and to see that that what we wanted for her life was to be a part of our family. But yes, right off the bat, I would say I felt like I was looking at and nursing a ghost who was still here.
Who was a ghost who was still here. And so you and I have talked about this, like both of us were nursing our daughters when we found out that they had a life-limiting condition. Yeah. And I stopped nursing Cameron. She was almost 6 months old, and I likely would have been stopping soon anyway, but I had to stop because I couldn't handle the disconnect between nurturing her so intimately and the fact that she was going to die. It was for me too much. And you've shared a little bit.
And that first month was, I would have loved to have stopped. She had not been able to figure out how to eat separate from me. And it required great mental gymnastics in that first month, especially, I think was the most challenging part of the entire disease, because I don't know that in that moment I would have said it was grief. It was just, it was profound sorrow and helplessness. What do I do now? And how am I going to possibly survive the duration of this? Because you're told that she's going to die, but she is not dead yet. And what do you do with that information? I mean, I had many conversations about what do you do with that information?
And you shared with me that there was a period right around then, like you were reluctant to be happy with her. Like you said
Yeah. She, every time she would laugh, I would say, like, how dare you? How dare you laugh and be happy? Don't you know what's coming? You're so oblivious. And how could anything else happy go on? How could I parent my other children happily, given what was happening? How could anything good exist in the world since something so terrible was happening? But I think that feeling after a month or two, it changed a little bit in that things become normalized. The more that you sit with it and the more that you see that, okay, she is going to die eventually, but she's not dead yet. And she is here and she does still have the ability to laugh. And that turned into one of our best moments with her, is when she laughed, and it became an identifying part of her life through her laughter. And every time she laughed, I took that side of me that said, how dare you laugh? This is something horrible. And I put it to the side and I said, look at you right now. And let me appreciate you in the right now. And most times that worked. Not every time, but most times.
Did you and David talk about that piece together? That reconciliation with the being present? Because I mean, what I think you're saying, which I remember, I mean, eventually it becomes normal. It's just like life. You just have to keep living. Yeah. Is being in the present moment, even as there's a part of your future that when most of us in our lives have no idea what's coming. But when your child's been diagnosed with a life-limiting condition, that's coming. Right. So that's the one. It's challenging to be present, and yet ultimately eventually we just get to that place because it's the only way to live.
Well, I think that in the end I didn't want to do a disservice to her, and she was still there. And while she was still there, it was my job to parent her in the here and now exactly as she was. And I think that what I felt that this period of anticipatory grief gave me was the ability to see her very, very clearly and not hope too much beyond what exactly she was. I didn't need to ask her to be anything more, and I didn't need to put any of my expectations onto her. When she laughed, it was pure, and we enjoyed it because that was that. I don't think I've ever appreciated my other children's laughter in the same way, because it was each one was a gift, and each one I marked in my memory. I mean, you have to live presently, but I think also living presently, for me at least, it meant not forgetting about what's going to happen in the future, because that would be living in denial. And so it's a really thin balancing act between living in the present and accepting the present exactly as it is, and making a choice to not let that present drag you down. But it's not easy, and it wasn't easy for me. But it can be a choice if you make it a choice.
Are there people? Did you find yourself? Did you proactively seek people to help you do that?
Yeah. I mean, the NTSAD organization was very helpful, and finding other families that had been through it, both those people who had children who had already passed away. And in fact, Blyth says we met in April at the conference, but I really met her on a DVD that had been sent to me through the organization, where I got to see a whole bunch of families talking about their experience, and feeling like you're not alone was everything to me. And finding people who parented the same way that I parented, the same way that when my firstborn was born, I tried to find other mothers who parented the same way that I did. As I was parenting Talia through this new frontier, I needed to find other people who had done it and who could help me feel less unique. Mm-hmm. It's such a rare disease, but it's isolating. But it's actually, I mean, there are other people who have been through it. And so finding those other people and talking to them, and even finding newly diagnosed families who had never been through it, but who were going through it around the same time as me, was hugely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of what Courageous Parents Network is all about. Like, here are your people. I mean, we were very fortunate to be to have a diagnosis that came with a family, a patient disease group with a robust community. And we were fortunate to have company, even though I'm sorry we had company. But, there are a lot of people who don't have a home base the way we did.
Well, what I found comforting about the Courageous Parents Network was that I felt an affinity, much like before I met you, I felt an affinity with you on screen, as I saw you and your husband talking on screen about parenting. Through the Courageous Parents Network, you can watch videos of other families, and you can feel that connection, and you can identify the people who are going through, even people who did not have the same disease as Talia, but who were parenting through the unimaginable. The more I collected stories, the less alone I felt, even if the stories were not directly in my path. And the less alone I felt, the stronger I felt in my ability to stay focused with my care plan and care for Talia in a present way.
Nancy Frumer-Styron, the psychologist, talks about going to the edge and peeking over. Did you, and then coming back, did you do that?
Did. The edge of real grief, where I could really picture the end. I think when I went to the conference, Talia was, as someone at the conference said, she was at the sweet spot in Tay-Sachs, which I said, but it was true in retrospect. She still had the ability to connect with people, and there were so many people who just loved being with her because they reminded her so much of their own children.
That was me.
But there were other children there who were further progressed in their disease. And it was my biggest fear going to the conference, seeing what the future would hold for Talia, because I tried so hard to keep my blinders on and just see her and parent just her in the moment, while knowing that the future was there. But then being in a room with other children for whom the future really was there, and some of the children were months away from dying, was very challenging. But also when I came back, I think I had I was more invigorated in my ability to care for her. I saw her as both more alive, and I also saw what the future would be. And seeing it is scary, but living it without peeking into the future is scary too.
I thought it was scarier. Fear of the unknown is, for me, and I think this is what Nancy was talking about, like, we can deactivate some of the dread by getting a better idea of what it looks like.
The more you practice things, the more it becomes normal. Like towards the end of Talia's life, I started practicing in my mind, how would I answer the question of how many children do I have? It's not going to take the pain away when it gets asked, but I practiced what my answers would be so that I wouldn't be surprised. And the more normalized something becomes, the more you're able to deal with it. And I think that was certainly helpful for me.
You when we were talking beforehand, you talked about how you stressed this notion of normal, preparing, asking people to treat you. Like one of the proactive things that you did as a way of coping was to tell people what it was you needed and what you would and wouldn't tolerate. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think it's weird to say that this period of anticipatory grief is a gift, because it's incredibly, incredibly hard. But it is also an opportunity to be proactive about grief and help the people around you understand how to relate to you. Because one of the things I was most afraid of, and I often thought, what if Talia had just died in an instant, in a weekend, a sudden something? What would grief look like for my other children? What would it look like for me and my husband, or my parents, his parents, if it had happened suddenly? And then we were having to deal with the aftermath of grief and explaining death to my other children, because it's so clear. So we had this time to, I spent the time training the people around me. I don't know if they knew I was training them, or if I could say specifically that I was doing that, but teaching them that what we were going through was an extreme example of parenting, an extreme example of life, but it was still life, and it was still my family. And I refused to be deified. I didn't want to be a hero mom. I didn't want to be the person who was dealing with this extraordinary circumstance over there. And I know that a part of that was because I feared that after Talia was gone, if I had been placed above everyone, like I'm that hero mom, I can't believe she does it, how does she do it, I can't imagine, that's where I would stay. And I refused to be separated. And I didn't want my children to be extraordinary siblings, to be something different. So we parented Talia. She was one of our children. She was one part of the family. And I didn't make our entire world revolve around her, just like I would not have made our whole world revolve around my other two, or I wouldn't ask them to make their world revolve around me. But it required great focus, and training the people around me in that it's okay to talk about death. Please do. Please don't treat it like it's like it's not happening.
Like it's extreme. It is extreme,
yes.
But don't treat it like, I mean, it
don't
has
treat
happened.
it like it's extreme.
It's happened.
But also don't deny it.
Yeah.
You just have to, I was like the horse with the blinders on. Let's all see it for what it is, name it, accept it, and live.
And how it's been 6 months now?
Yeah.
How do you feel that strategy is playing out after?
I think quite well. I don't think my children truly understood that something extraordinary was happening until she was gone. There's only so much that anticipatory grief can do for you. Someone's either there or they're not, even though Talia was both there and not there, because she was a warm, wonderful body, but her mind was not there.
She was not active. She was not active. She was not an active player.
No. So when she was gone, it was different. And there was a different type of grieving too. It was a grieving of the end of being a caregiver, and the end of that very intense, very weird period of anticipatory grief. And I think looking back, I don't know that I recognized in the time that she was alive the amount of fear that I was living with daily.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Because
Can you say a little more about that? Yeah.
I understood what was happening, but there was still a mystery into the timeline. Mm-hmm. Even when you know that it's life limiting, I didn't know when it was going to happen, and I didn't know how it was going to happen. And so everything is easier to deal with. If I could have seen the end, I think I could have been calmer in the time leading up to it. Yeah. If I could have predicted the fact that she was not in pain.
Mm-hmm. But you didn't know she wouldn't be.
No, I did not know
That's the thing. Did you, was there one thing that you were most afraid of?
I think I was afraid that she would be in pain and I would not be able to tell it. Mm-hmm.
I think, what was my greatest? I mean, most of my fears were actually taken away because Charlie was with our nephew Hayden when he died. So he had already seen. And while I knew that, I didn't realize then that I assumed my daughter's death would be like my nephew's death. Mm-hmm. And I think in most ways it was. And it hadn't occurred to me that it could be otherwise, which I think is just as well. But I think my greatest fear was that I wouldn't know the moment that she was dying.
Oh, I talked to David, who is a doctor and has seen death lots. But much like I asked him before I gave birth, like, but what will contractions feel like? Mm-hmm. But what will death look like? You will know it when you know it, much like contractions. That they're pretty obvious. And yeah,
this is such a surreal conversation. I just have to acknowledge that this is a very surreal conversation. If you had to, let me just check to see if there are any questions before we go on. Okay, not yet.
I'll lean also.
Well, we're leaning. You can tell my age. If you had, you said something to me also that you had thought that because you were doing all this processing and acknowledging of your grief while she was alive, that you knew it would help you after, but you weren't quite. You thought it would totally protect you from the grief that followed after.
I think that I spoke to other parents who had been through their child's life, and they said that often they were the ones who were not crying at the funeral because they had been living with it for so long, and they were so happy that their child was no longer suffering. And so I believed that would be the case for me, and I believed that I would have dealt with all of the grief before. But of course, it's very complicated. Your daily role in life, and I was a stay-at-home mother, and your role changes when they're no longer there, and that period of time of being that caregiver, of staying so focused, it ends, and then what?
It's another loss.
Yeah, it is. They're there and then they're not. And then my attention had to turn to my other kids again, which my attention had been on them the whole way through. I am deeply grateful that I had the time to make them comfortable with the idea of death before she was gone, because that did help. It really did. And they are better off because of that knowledge. But of course I cried at her funeral. I cried for the whole experience, and I felt a great deflating of the fear that I had been carrying, of my shoulders. My literal shoulders had been up like that, and over the course of that month, partly from the holding of her. But it just released, and that release is great. But then there's still a lingering fear of all of the things that are out there in the world. And who's to say that we're not all in some state of anticipating what is the next thing. And so I think that the things that I learned through that period of obvious anticipatory grief, and now this after part where I anticipate that anything could happen in life, it's the same lesson. It's stay focused in the present, surround yourself with people who understand you and who are willing to speak truth and see things clearly, and just keep living, because you're doing everyone a disservice otherwise. I did not want to give that disease one more ounce of power than it was already going to have, you know?
There are days that you took it back, like my family, my child, my family.
Yeah, I understood you. I understand the disease is going to take Talia. I understood that very quickly, but I refused to let it take anything else.
Wow. I don't remember thinking that. Maybe there were pieces of that there, but for me, I remember feeling like my husband Charlie and me really talking about what we wanted for Cameron's life, which was a version of that, and what we wanted for ourselves, and in framing things in the affirmative in the face of something that was so negative, like trying to take it back and put things into the affirmative. My goodness, it's already, look at the time. I'm going to see if we have any questions. Does anybody have any questions? No. Okay. At least not that I can see, if I'm doing this right. These are early days yet for you.
Yeah.
This 6 months. And you've been writing a lot as part of your way of processing.
Yes.
Now. Has your writing revealed parts of yourself to yourself through?
I will say parenting Talia has revealed that I can write.
Oh.
That was not a part of my life beforehand. And so I'll be forever grateful to her for opening up that facet in me. And I guess through the writing, I have figured out that I can connect with other people in a different way. Because I always have thoughts in my head that I feel like were I don't know how they were formed, but as people have connected through my writing, I feel grateful to be in a larger community. And I hate what happened to Talia, but I feel the positivity of what that larger community can do and is doing.
And what you're doing in that hope.
Because while she was alive, I was not able to look much beyond myself. I did try to find some people that I connected with, but only after she has died, and only after I know the end of that story, am I really able to allow other people's who are still parenting their children. Am I really able to allow them and their story into my world?
It's so true. It's when Charlie and I were going through with daughter Cameron, we were going through it also with Tim and Allison, my brother and sister-in-law, but those were the only families that I was really letting in, even though we were connected to other families whose children had Tay-Sachs through NTSAD. I didn't really let them in, and I think that's human nature, right? You're like taking care of your there's only so much you can pay attention to.
Yeah. And I was too afraid I would be consumed. Because it's enough to take on your own grief and look out for the ones around you than to try and take on everyone else's as well. But I think it's a community that it's a real cyclical community that looks after each other, much like
it's we part of how we make it a little better is to take care of the people who are coming along after us.
Yeah. But I mean, reaching out to the resources like the Courageous Parents Network that allow you to connect, but in a way that you're ready for.
Yeah.
Looking outside yourself is the number one most important thing. Otherwise I would have, if I wasn't able to look outside myself, I wouldn't have been able to see Talia. I would have just felt my own grief. And if I wasn't able to look outside of Talia, I wouldn't have been able to see my other kids. And if I wasn't able to look outside my family, I would have thought that we were the only ones suffering. And we are far from the only ones suffering, unfortunately. And the less rare and the less isolated and the less alone you can feel, the more you're going to be able to survive, because you have to take on the responsibility of your survival and the survival of the ones you love.
Okay, so I'm looking to see, I don't see any questions. So unless I've done something wrong, I think we are going to sign off. No, do you see anything, Carla?
I do not.
All right. Hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us. This will be recorded and on our Facebook page and on CPN, as with the other one with Dr. Nancy from Iron and Carrie. And we have lots of resources on anticipatory grief on the website. And we also have things on bereavement. And I hope you will, if you have questions for us, send them directly to us. You can post them on Facebook, on our Facebook page. You can email us at connect@courageousparentsnetwork.org. And this is all about taking care of each other and our children and our family and our community. And thank you. And just making sure. All right. I don't see anything else.
Thanks.
So thank you, and see you next time. Bye.